Hi, Denisha. It's a real pleasure to meet you, albeit virtually. Denisha is a senior economist at Positive Money UK. We'd love to hear about your story, what led you to becoming a senior economist, what that even means, and yeah, kind of your work in Positive Money and why Positive Money is doing the work they're doing.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's so lovely to see people from so many different parts of the world. I wasn't actually expecting that, but that's really lovely. So my name is Denisha. As Christabel mentioned, I work at a think tank called Positive Money. We're quite a small think tank, and we really focus on the money and banking system. We have Positive Money UK, but we also have Positive Money Europe, and recently set up Positive Money US, and hope to go, build it further as much as we can. Our main goal is really to look at the money and banking system and see how to reform it so that it serves people and planet rather than profits and power. So that's the idea really behind it. And we really sort of look at how we can propose ideas that make systemic change. And so most of the problems we see in the world, they're complex, and they come from, you can come at them from different angles. So what we do is we come at it from the point of view of the money and banking system. We are an unusual think tank because we're small, but also we cover sort of research, campaigning, and policy and influencing. So we combine all those things together, and our campaigns involve bringing local groups together to kind of do their own sort of actions against money and banking system, but also the central bank and the government. So we try to mobilize local groups as well through our campaigns, and that's sort of what sets us apart, I guess, from other research think tanks. And the research part that I work on with a team of 4 people is we really just try and create that kind of evidence base for the sort of actions we want to take and propose, the policies that we propose. So my job, along with the others, is to really create the evidence for that, to monitor the sort of events taking place, look at data and trends, and try and create a robust analysis of what's going on in the world. And a big part of what we do is try to explain what's actually going on in reality and how it affects people's daily lives, and trying to link up the sort of actions by big, powerful economic institutions with how they impact everyday people's lives, and make those links more accessible to people. Because I think people often think the financial system, either in their country or globally, is just really far removed from them, and they don't really think it has any impact on them. But we try and sort of highlight how we can sort of see the way in which it affects our jobs, our incomes, the way we live, our chances of owning a home, things like that. So yeah, I guess that sort of sums up what we do. One thing about Positive Money is it really started after the global financial crisis. So one of the things was people wanted to know how money was created and how banks sort of led us into this big, massive crisis and recession that did affect people's lives very deeply. They lost their homes, they lost their jobs and their incomes. So it was sort of around that time that Positive Money came about, to really build knowledge and make it accessible for us to understand how money's created and how it's diverted into activities that are not helpful for people and planet. So a lot of the money around that time was being diverted into risky financial assets. And I don't know how much to go into it, but those risky financial assets, were mortgages mostly. You can think of the game Jenga. Once one small part of it starts to crumble, once someone starts to, along the chain of events, default on their mortgage, then the whole thing starts to sort of crumble down slowly. So, and a big part of that is also government and the role of states and international institutions, because they set the rules for these banks and investors, and they have also the power to change those rules. So we also focus on the role of those institutions as well.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Denisha. It's really inspiring to hear you speak about kind of mobilizing local groups and having that like kind of community focused action and engagement. I think that often people think that either, it's like what they're doing with their money in quite an individualistic way, or it's very much about system governments. And I think the bridge between the individual and systemic is community mobilization. So that sounds really, really exciting. So at Positive Money, you're campaigning for a fairer banking system, fairer money system, and a sustainable and democratic economy. But what would a system like that look like? Because we know what we don't want. We don't want infinite growth finite planet. We don't want the current system, which is creating global inequality, social injustice. What's the kind of vision? Right? What would a sustainable economy look like?
Yeah, so we kind of very much in line with the stuff that you guys are interested in and you work on. We really, our sort of vision is, how do we make the money and banking system and the broader financial system work for people and planet rather than profits? So we sort of have four main areas that we work on, and I can sort of talk you through them. The first one, sort of democratizing money and banking, and this really links to things like requiring a more kind of diverse ecosystem in the banking sector. So we've got a system where it's very kind of concentrated in big major banks, big investment banks and high street banks. And we all know the big names like HSBC, Barclays. We sort of look at how we can sort of make that more diverse. So we're interested in promoting things like community banks, cooperative banks, state-led banks. So state-led banks are sort of, I guess, banks run by institutions that are part of the government that can direct money towards it where it needs to go. So one thing is a financial system that's not very well regulated tends to divert money to where it can make more profits, which tends to be risky assets. If there aren't regulations in place to stop them doing that, then they will sort of keep doing that because it just makes more sense in the system. And it's very systemic. You know, people aren't there sort of sitting there kind of, I don't know what, you know, planning it in some sort of secretive way, but it's just very systemic. It has a sort of a motivation of its own. So, you know, state-led banks are a good alternative to make sure we can divert large amounts of money towards things we need, like infrastructure in the economy, or people's well-being, or schools and health and education. So, and these aren't unusual things. We've had them in our history of our economies for a long time. It's only really in the last, since the sort of late 70s and early 80s, that this system of like the concentration of power in just a few big banking institutions has come about. So we have a long history of state-led banks, for example, or what we call credit guidance, which is where parts of the government, certain institutions in the government will guide credit to where it needs to go to serve the needs of their population. We also look at how to democratize the money and banking system. So we've done research and work on why, for example, the Bank of England, but also, I guess, big international institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are very much white male concentrated institutions and run by the same sorts of people, and there isn't enough diversity in them. And when you have more diversity in terms of race, class, and gender, then you get people making decisions for a more diverse population, basically, rather than, you know, just the 1%, I guess. And at the moment, what we find is there's a big revolving door between these institutions. You know, a lot of people from big financial institutions like Goldman Sachs are often switching between government and back to the banking sector. And again, it's not necessarily a sort of cynical way of looking at it, but we know these things have their own sort of systemic way of being set into place, and they have their own the wheels get set in motion, and it's hard to change those directions unless we analyze it, point it out, and can say, let's regulate it, let's change that. So another strand of ours, the second strand, is a fair and green Bank of England. So we do a lot of work on trying to make the Bank of England support a green transition. So a big element of that is the Bank of England's monetary policy. So the policies they they're in control of in terms of the economy is mainly things like price stability. So they look at inflation and interest rates, and they also do a lot of operations in the financial sector to keep it functioning well. And they also regulate the financial sector. So we look at all those different policies that they do and look at how they can green those policies and green those operations. For example, back in March, the government told the Bank of England, they wrote to the Bank of England and said, you have a new mandate to make sure that you support the government's objectives to help us transition to a green economy. So that means we want to see the Bank of England starting to write to banks and financial institutions and to tell them how to green their operations. How do they invest more in green activities, green infrastructure, rather than putting their money into damaging activities? Yeah, there's just lots of things that the Bank of England could be doing because they set the rules for the financial sector. So they can also tell the financial sector what to do and what not to do. So one of our biggest things at the moment is we want the Bank of England to make it harder and more expensive for banks to put money into fossil fuels. What we know is the biggest challenge now is we have to end financing fossil fuels. And I think a recent estimate that we've been putting out there is since the Paris Agreement, which was 2015, 60 of the world's biggest banks have pumped 3.8 trillion into fossil fuel projects. That's a huge amount of money that could be going towards creating green infrastructure, renewables, green jobs. So we're sort of making demands that the Bank of England has to really regulate this. They have to make it more expensive for banks to do it, which means banks would have to hold more capital if they're going to invest in a fossil fuel project, or we could just ideally end that completely and regulate it and bring it to an end, which is really what we'd want to see. Hope I'm not going too fast. So another strand of what we, is that, yeah, please stop me if I am. Another strand is a wellbeing economy. This is a new area for us. And again, it links to the other stuff, which is that we think that the Bank of England and the UK government should be working closely together to make sure we divert finance and money, not just private, but also public money towards things that benefit people's well-being. And that's things like health, mental health, nicer public spaces, so people can enjoy public spaces rather than go shopping and spend money on things. And so, yeah, we're still developing this idea, but one of the key strands of that is we want to promote this idea that we don't need to endlessly go after growth in our economies. We're already quite well off certainly in the global north. This doesn't really apply to the global south, but in the global north, our countries are already very well off. We don't need to be constantly looking to increase growth all the time. We could be putting our attention on other things like well-being. So yeah, and I think good jobs is part of that. Jobs that perhaps mean that you have more of a balance in your life with your family and also working, and also looking at precarious employment and low wages. So that's all part of us having better lives. And then finally, our last strand is new economic thinking. So this is a little bit of a difficult one to explain, but basically a lot of what economics is based on is just one school of thought, which is the idea that the free market should dominate. And we want to promote the idea that actually there are lots of different ways of looking at the economy and lots of different ideas out there and different schools of thought. There's things like looking at racial capitalism, gender capitalism, so feminist economics. So we want to sort of try and lead the way in bringing different ways of looking at the economy, not just one way. So yeah, those are the key strands of how we hope to make more systemic change.
Amazing. Thank you so much for so kind of eloquently giving us an overview of all the incredible work that Positive Money is doing. I really love the phrase well-being economy because I think it feels really relatable and understandable, like why economy is meant to be like the sharing of resources. It's like a exchange of value, like why that's a man-made system that we've created. Why should it not be directly in relation to the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet. And I love that you mentioned, that the current banking system that we have hasn't been around forever. It's not some kind of natural law or something very, very ancient. It's continually changing and growing. And I think the more that we realize that it's possible for us to change the economy, the more that we can galvanize ourselves and each other. So next week we have COP26 starting. I feel that in these climate negotiations, there's a lot of talk, but also that the things that are happening doesn't feel like it's getting to the root of the issue, which in my mind is, well, part of it is the economy and the economic system. So what are some of the things, as we kind of turn our attention to COP, that we should be excited about? Like, are there any kind of actual radical solutions that are coming from governments that in response to the economy? And also, what are some of the red flags that we need to be aware of? Because certain things sound like they're going to be good, but actually they're small plasters on big gaping wounds.
Yeah, it's really good questions. I think it's felt like a crazy time in the lead up to COP, and we're just on the eve of it, really. It's this weekend. I guess one of the big things, I can come at it from the point of view of what we're sort of looking at, and we're trying to highlight the role of banks in funding fossil fuels, funding climate destruction. We know that, for example, the International Energy Agency has said that really fossil fuels has to end now. We have to stop funding fossil fuels to be able to have a chance of aligning with the Paris goals. And the Paris goals from 2015 is to try and keep global temperatures, well below 2 degrees. And current commitments, there have been reports recently that show our current commitments from governments are very much towards the higher end of 3% and above. So we're not on track at all, and the window's closing, basically. So the point of COP, with world leaders gathering either online or in person, is they're going to look at what sort of commitments different country governments will put forward to try and reduce emissions for us to get to net zero by 2050. Another big element of COP will be climate finance for countries in the global south. So we know that these are the countries that are on the front line of fighting and resisting climate change. They're hit hardest, the burden falls hardest on them, but they are not the ones responsible for it at all. So a big element of COP is going to be what sort of climate finance is going to be offered up by countries to the global south. I think one thing we do know is that the agreement from 2015 at the Paris previously by governments was for 100 billion a year to go to global south countries, and we're already, that's by 2025, I think, or 2024, and we already know we're missing those targets. So we need to see much more ramped up commitments on that front. And that's basically to help these countries mitigate against climate change and adapt to the dangers that they're facing. So it's all really around commitments for net zero and also finance. There needs to be vast sums of money being directed into adapting and mitigating against climate change rather than sort of kicking the can down the road. So I think those are the things we're going to be looking out for. The things we're asking for in terms of what we're doing and the activities we're doing is really to end financing fossil fuels and redirect that money towards a green and fair transition. So those will be the key things that we're demanding. I guess in terms of red flags, there'll be a lot of analysis after and during the 2 weeks that COP is taking place. I think the biggest red flag will be around finance. What sort of activities are they doing to regulate finance into fossil fuels and ending that, and what commitments they're making to put money towards a green and fair transition. And the International Energy Agency, again, has said we need to triple global funds towards clean energy, and it's something like over 3 trillion. I think. So we need to see large sums of money being committed to taking action.
Amazing, Denisha, thank you so much. Do you have any kind of recommendations for us as individuals about how can we learn more? I mean, until a few years ago, until I realized how fundamental the economy was to kind of societal transformation, it sounds silly, but we just kept coming back to the fact that we can't address the ecological crisis, social crisis, mental crisis without addressing the economy. But it's taken me years, and I still to even start to grasp the kind of current economic system we have. So yeah, do you have any recommendations of resources and places to go so we can learn more, as well as any kind of actions that we can take in our own lives?
Yeah, I think there's lots of groups nowadays that are trying to make this stuff more accessible to people. And I'd be happy to try and send send some sort of resources and links to you guys. Obviously, please check out Positive Money and our resources, because we sort of put a lot of videos out, actually, often on Twitter, to try and explain what's sort of going on. And we've just put a video out explaining why we need to address central banks and climate finance, and we try and break it down as simply as we can. I think there are other big organizations that are doing lots of activities. So if you find what aspect of that you're interested in, look up for those organizations and follow what they're doing, sort of see what campaigns they're running, and look at the resources they have, and just follow your interests in that respect. That's really important. What inspires you, because that's what you'll take action on. I think also you are doing lots. You're all here right now, coming together to talk about these things and take action yourself. So you should really be proud of yourself. And it's always hard to take out time from your own lives to get together with people at very different times across the world and talk about these things. I think one of the major areas that's sort of lacking is for people to kind of look at different economic ideas out there. So there's groups like Rethinking Economics that try and explain that there are different ways of looking at the economy. It's not just the one way that we're told by governments and important central bankers and stuff. They always say that there isn't any money, or there isn't, the debt's too high, for example, so we don't have the money to pay for things, or, so just moving away from what the mainstream says. These sort of big institutions tell us one thing, but if we look at economics from sort of the margins, from different perspectives, they can tell us something else. So there are groups like Rethinking Economics that are really useful on that front, and you can find them online. And they have, they do work with people from all over the world. I know they do work with students and economists in India and Africa. So they're really spreading out so that they speak to issues for people from different parts of the world and not just the global north. And I think, just follow your interests mostly. Look, follow the stuff that motivates you, and take action wherever you can. And I can see that you're all doing that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Han, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Denisha. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask a quick question about what you think about some other kind of actions that we can take, because sometimes it feels like we can do stuff with our purchasing power and like buy local and try and like strengthen local economies, which is really cool. And I wondered but it sometimes feels quite limited. And I wondered what you think about kind of localized, like where I live, there was a localized currency for quite a long time, which has just been shut down because it kind of just was too difficult, like for people to use, but it had a big following for a long time. And also things like switching to like alternative local banks that don't invest in fossil fuels or using cash. Like, are there other things that we can do to at least feel like we're kind of part of something a bit bigger in terms of economic change?
That's a really great question. I think, one thing we're doing, one of the strands of stuff we work on is protecting cash, because a lot of people, especially people on very low incomes, it's very difficult for them to use electronic resources, use cards and things like that. So one of our strands of work is to protect cash. And also we're starting to look at the importance of a central bank digital currency as a payment system. So if you go on our website, you'll see some information about that. But in terms of local economies, I think, buying local is a really important way for us to support a sort of green transition, because we're not sort of funding these sort of exploitative supply chains that involve a lot of transport and distribution that can be damaging for the environment, but also involve really low wage precarious workers in different parts of the world. So buying locally is really good sort of action to take. And I think just maybe working with your people in your local community around things like setting up local banks or credit unions and things like that. So yeah, definitely, moving your money and sort of away from the major investment and high street banks towards fairer banking practices is really valuable. I think on the individual level, there are lots of things that we all can do and we all try to do, but I think it's also about teaming up with the bigger actions where we demand, big powerful institutions actually do take action for us as well is really important. So sort of combining what we do at the local level with taking action at the national and international level is really important. So I think consumers have power in that respect as well, not just in terms of the micro choices they make, but in terms of making collective action with others. So a lot of organizations, have campaign groups and mobilize people to take action against not against, but to take action to demand the government and the Bank of England should do more to invest in a fair and green transition. I think that stuff is also equally important as the sort of micro level decisions that we make.
Thank you so much, Ms. Danisha, for this amazing eye-opening presentation. Of course, there's a lot to learn from your websites and videos, but I had a quick question for you, and this is regarding the advent of digital currencies that's creeping slowly but steadily, in these spaces. So how should we approach that? Are we to support it because we really don't understand how it operates as we kind of tackle regular economic upsurge? So what's your, positive take or negative take on this whole blockchaining as such?
Yeah, we're sort of in the early stages of kind of building our sort of thinking on that. But really what we would sort of argue for is we need a public payment system, a digital public payment system. So it should be like the control of any digital currency should be in the hands of state institutions. We do have concerns about lots of different private providers, things like Facebook and I'm not sure if they're Bitcoin and things like that, because the tendency of these private providers of digital currencies is for it to be more like an asset. It tends to just get a lot of money being pumped into it. The value of it goes up very suddenly, and then it also goes down very suddenly. So it has a tendency to be more like a financial asset rather than what we need it to be is to help people make payments that they need to make. We also worry about privacy and the use of data by these institutions, by groups like Facebook and their own kind of currencies. So our argument really is going towards it should be state-led and a public payment system so that we can ensure it's regulated, ensure it protects consumers, and ensure it protects against our privacy and data issues. And one thing is really all central banks at the moment across the world are actually looking into digital currencies now and looking at how to develop them and provide them. So one issue we're concerned about is the extent to which they might lean on private companies to help deliver those digital currencies. So we want it really to be in the hands of people rather than the data and the kind of infrastructure of providing a digital currency being in the hands of private actors. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers your question.
Thank you so much, Ms. Danisha. Just a quick note on the whole data as the new currency. Hopefully we should all be wary and kind of have mindful investment. And thank you so much for your time. This really means a lot. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you. Wow, Denisha, that's been so eye-opening, and we've managed to cover so much in a really short period of time, and I just thought we could talk and ask you questions for hours. But yeah, thank you, and I hope you stay in touch with us, and we'll share the recording with you and everything.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it, and I will try and send some resources out to you so you can share them, and hopefully be able to see you all again.
Brilliant. Thank you, Denisha.
Thank you.
Bye.